Professor Leonie Pikama, who's a mother of 6 and a grandmother of 5, and director of the Te Kotahi, not quite right, but hopefully closer than when I first started, the Te Kotahi Research Institute at the University of Waikato. Leonie is also director of the Maori and Indigenous Analysis Company, Limited Company, and has a lot of other titles that I would trip over if I tried to introduce you. But please welcome all the way from across the lake, Leonie.
Kia ora, tātou, tuatangi tēnei. E te autanga, ai ako te Iwizu Rāturu, nē tēnei kia koutou i whakatana mai au, e noni tōku te whenua i tēnei wā, hiri no te whare tēnā koutou, ki te whanau ngā roto rangi wana tēnei tōna. Ai sōne ngā me ki a koe, nau e karanga mai ki a ki te hara mai 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 a koutou, i tēnei wā no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So I just wanted to, in my own language, firstly acknowledge being on Wiradjuri territory and the ancestors, past, present and future, of these lands and of this place. So meeting you has been a really exceptional experience. I feel like in a day, the relationship that we have as Indigenous people has just flourished. In 24 hours. And I think that is the nature of our connection as Indigenous nations in the Pacific Ocean. Is that our connection goes back into that ancestral memory that precedes many, many things on our lands and connects us in an ongoing, yesterday you talked about there never being an end or a beginning. There is a cycle of life that continues, and you know, for our people, many of our people, the connection to you as tuatanga, to the many nations on this land as the elder siblings of the Indigenous line in this part of the world, has been ongoing and acknowledged for a very long time. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge this land. Yesterday was a really exceptional day for me. I felt like there were so many seasons in one day. It was so hot. And I'm not one to complain about heat because I know the other side of the cold. And so, and then there were, you know, dust storms, and then there was rain, and then there was a kind of thunder booms in the day. And there's something really special about being a visitor on this land and experiencing that in 24 hours. And it's hard to explain, but it really does remind me of the connections that we have. So, I knew I needed to follow suit. I knew that this was the right order to get a sense of this place. Blake, thank you for having us. And to hear what Three Rivers are doing and seeking to do in your work, and then you know, be grounded by someone who can really locate us in the fundamental notion of self-determination of nations on their own lands. And so I do many things, but actually being a mother and a grandmother is what drives everything that I do. Being a Māori woman, being a Te Atiawa woman. I'll just flick this on. There we go, just get the notes up. Because as Sue was saying, you know, we also have this term Māori, and I talked about yesterday that the term Māori is, it means pure, normal or ordinary. And ordinary not in the sense of a demeaning sense, but ordinary as in we are the people of the land, we're the first people, we're the normal people, we're not the other people. And our colonial history is a history of being othered, but actually our ancestors see us and saw us in the term Māori as being the ones of the land. And so when we talk about pure water or drinking water, we talk about wai Māori, pure water. And so the term Māori, as Sir's talked about in terms of the term Aboriginal, and many other terms that universalise our nations as Indigenous people. This one that we use more as a strategic term now of coming together and connecting ourselves. But we too, connect in terms of our tribal connections. So on that, I'm going to sit down. So this is one of the mountains that I come from. It's an ancestral mountain called Taranaki. It's on the west side of the North Island. They call it the North Island. We call it Te Ika Maui, the fish of Maui. So Maui was an ancestor that came through the Pacific Islands. And so in most of the Pacific nations, there is Maui exists as an ancestor. And the sea by which I live, or the ocean by which I live, we call Ngā Tai o Rehua, and the tides of Rehua, who is an ancestor. And that is the sea between us and here, that they call the Tasman Sea. And we know that Tasman had really not any connection in any significant way other than sailing past our territories accidentally, whereas our ancestors moved through the Pacific very intentionally. So as a name, the Tasman Sea really bears no resemblance to the connection that we have to that ocean. So, and this is the mountain that I grew up under, and that has really informed my way of thinking in terms of being quite in the way that geography and our environment shapes us as Indigenous people. And I think as we move around the world, we see that. We see our environment and our relationships to all things in our environment and all the living things that we share this planet Earth, Papatūānuku, this Earth parent with, really shapes and informs our understandings of things. And so I am, my tribal nations are Te Atiawa, Ngāti Mahanga, which is of Waikato, which is of the Hamilton area, and our Mahanga are Taiwi, which is another tribal group from the west coast, from Taranaki. So I just wanted to do that positioning. So I currently am in a university, the University of Waikato, and I direct Te Kotahi Research Institute. I have a kind of strange relationship with universities. When I feel like they're institutionalising me too much, I leave them. It's like, it becomes a bad relationship and one has to divorce and move on. And so I also run a community-based research organisation, MAIA, Māori and Indigenous Analysis, and the word MAIA means to be steadfast. In my current role as Director of Te Kotahi, I've been very privileged to be in this organisation. I just want to talk a little bit about it because I think it is a really powerful model of what we would call kaupapa Māori or Māori philosophy related to co-production. I think there are specific Indigenous ways in which we talk about relationships and we forge relationships and we maintain relationships and they're enduring and they're ongoing. And for me, that is the essence of an Indigenous co-production. And so we're named Te Kotahi after Robert Te Kotahi Mahuta, and he was the first person to establish a Māori research centre in any university in the country in 1972, and it was at the University of Waikato. He was also the lead negotiator for the Waikato tribal treaty negotiations, and so he led that all the way through to what they call settlement, when some agreement was come to with the Crown in terms of some land return, some asset return, and some financial compensation. So he led that process for the tribe. And so in 2010, some of you will be aware of Linda Smith's work. Linda worked with a group called Te Ropu Manukura, which is a tribal council or committee that sits alongside the University of Waikato. So there are 18 to 19 iwi groups, tribal groups that have representation on that committee. And he established that many years ago as a way of developing partnership with the university. And that committee has, the chair of that committee is on council. So it's an embedded position on the university council. So it has a direct line into the overall governance of the university itself. And so that makes this particular group, Te Ropu Manukura, it brings to the university an already kind of embedded relationship with the tribal groups that connect to the university. So those tribal groups include people who are of Waikato, Waikato Tainui, the region on the land on which the university sits, the tribal people of the land, and it also includes representatives of people who have students that come to the university or who have staff that teach in the university. So it's kind of like the catchment group of the University of Waikato. And we as an institute, so as a research institute, what we have is that we have this already embedded group of tribal representatives that we have a direct embedded structural relationship with in the university. And they were the group that worked with Linda to establish our institute. So I guess what I'm saying, really the main point for me around this is that we've been present as a research institute alongside the tribal nations connected to the university from the beginning. And when we think about Linda's decolonising methodology work, for those of you who have read it, and what we call a kaupapa Māori theory and methodology approach, a very distinctively Māori grounded approach to theory and research. One of the key principles is tino rangatiratanga or rangatiratanga, which is the term we use for sovereignty and self-determination. And so Sue's discussion, your talk really connects directly to how we would see and how we practice what is now termed co-production, what we would call a kaupapa Māori approach, or an Indigenous approach to research, or a decolonising approach. Because of the connections that we have that have been forged from the very beginning of our work, we don't have to go looking for people to work with. And on the other side is that it's very rare for us to do university-initiated projects. All of our projects are initiated from those community organisations from the beginning, from either those tribal groupings or from Māori health providers, Māori service providers, Māori organisations, tribal organisations that work within those tribal areas. So we spend a lot of time being told what we're going to do and being told by our own communities what the question is, being told by our own communities what the issues are, being told by our communities who will be involved in it. And that, you know, as an institutional research-based group who are all committed to our own tribal communities, it's a very easy process for us because we have an immediate relationship with everyone that we're working with. And it's an ongoing, and it's a long-term, and it's enduring, and it's a kind of multifaceted relationship. So we do many things. So when I say we, I'm talking about a very small group of people. So in terms of permanent staff, there are 3 professional staff, and there is 1 permanent academic, which is me. Everyone else is contracted, is on time contract. So we're a very small team that do this work, but every team that we work with is actually co-led by the community that we're working with. So there are kind of these ways of doing things and ways of working that we do in Te Kotahi that we take for granted because that's the way, the philosophy that underpins our work. So I wanted to show you just a couple of things that are kind of, I guess, the breadth of what we do. Just get an idea. So the philosophy for our institution was set by Te Raupu Manukuna, and it's based on a notion of exploration and of investigating and examining and the kind of intellectual and an affirmation of the intellectual scholarly knowledge that we already have in our communities. So we tend to have this assumption that academics and scholars are only in institutions. But actually, for us, our people have had scholars, intellects, researchers from the beginning of time. This is not a new process for us. This is something we have done as Indigenous nations forever. And the remembering of how we do that is really important. So when we think about it in those terms, the notion of co-production is relatively straightforward because it is an equal relationship that you have. It is an informed relationship from community that you have. It is community determining the issues. It is community asking the questions and shaping the questions. And that we are doing that in a way that acknowledges the power relationships of the institution within it, which I sit, but doesn't privilege those power relationships. So I'm very clear, as a research director at the university, I'm very clear where my allegiances are. I'm really clear. So one of the things someone asked at an Indigenous conference a couple of years ago, they said, what? Because, we can get into these, people get into these dilemmas or tensions. Our community wants this, our institution expects this, so what do we do? And and that is going to be an ongoing issue in terms of how we locate ourselves. But if we're really clear about our own positionality and why we're doing something and why we're here and where our allegiances lie, those issues are easily resolved. So for me, and it might be because I've been in this for a very long time, one of the things for me is that I always remember who's going to bury me, and it's not the University of Waikato. And that may seem a little bit morbid, but actually in the cycle of life that our people think about and talk about, and our connection to land, and who is there at the end, is actually really important. And the way in which we think about our kin and our relationships and those that we are committed to, that's really important, because I know that at the end of my life, I go back to this mountain and I'm buried with my people in my land under this mountain. I'm really clear about that. So my life is lived to affirm those people who are going to do that for me at the end of my life. And that's very much a Kaupapa Māori way of thinking about things. And I know that there are problematics too inside of that. I know the removal of children, and we have a large number of Māori children removed, increasing numbers. Around the world, the numbers of Indigenous people, children being removed is increasing. And the disconnection and all of those things that come with that. So I say this knowing that it's not as straightforward as this for everyone. But there is something about the way in which we commit ourselves to an idea of co-production. It's that it's not a methodology, it's not a method, it's actually a way of living. It's about how we choose to live our lives and how we choose to live our lives in this particular workspace. So we are really involved in doing a whole range of things. I just wanted to show you a couple of things. So we have a philosophy, mahi ngā tahi me te iwi, that we will always work with iwi. So tribes, we will always work with community. That's been there from Te Rōpū Manukura from the very beginning, and it's a touchstone for everything we do. And it can make it really difficult for researchers who want to come and work with us, and they've got this really great research idea that they want to do. You know, because they come up with this really good idea, and we've just got to find someone who wants to do this idea with me. Because at the end of the day, that's not how we determine the work we do. And so I remember talking to a tribal director who had a similar thing, and so I said to her, what do you do? And she says, well, when I talk to researchers that come in, and they say, yeah, I want to come in, I've got these research interests, this is what I want to do, I actually have to counsel them out. Because that's not what we do. It might be what another institute will do, but our work is not driven by the fact that I want to know something, or I have a research interest. This is not a researcher-driven initiative. Everything is community-driven. So, and that means not just research, that means being engaged in things like running symposiums that are areas that communities or tribal groups, organisations want to know more about. So the co-production idea or the co-Māori approach idea goes across everything we do. Everything is done in a co-created space and a co-produced space. So people will, communities might want to know about Y262, which is a very big intellectual cultural property claim. So we'll run symposiums that are inclusive of all of these issues that people raise with us. And I'm just showing you this because I think we get caught up in this idea that it's only about research. But actually, when we're working in this, it's much more than research. And when I heard the overview of the Three Rivers, you've got so many multiple strands to the work that you're doing, that it means having all of these kind of multiple layers of things happening all of the time, simultaneously. So this is what we call kingitanga te. So kingitanga is the kingitanga was established in the 1850s by tribal leaders nationally as a response to colonisation and to the theft of our lands, disposition of lands. And so our people came together in the 1850s and made a decision to have a role that would sit in the same place as the Queen of England. So the first Māori king was named. And that was to have a conversation at the same level. And that has come through generations, and we now have a Māori king, but prior to Tuheitia, we had 40 years of a Māori queen. And that movement has been housed in the territory that we live in Waikato, and it's been known as the kingitanga. So one of the things that we have in place through Te Rōpū Manukura, through this tribal council, is that every day the University of Waikato has kingitanga day. And on that day, there are no classes. On that day, everyone is expected to come to the university to gain more knowledge about the land and about the kingitanga. So all faculties are expected to do something, seminar, workshop, symposium, that is going to give their students and staff and the wider university community information and knowledge about the history of the kingitanga. So it's quite an exceptional day, and it's very unique. you know, universities don't like cutting out teaching time for a whole day. And these are, so we will go to the various groups that we're working with and ask them what we should do for Kingi Tama Day. We'll always do a student event, so there's always a mighty student event on this day. But we have all kinds of things that we do. We did constitutional, range of speakers around constitutional change in terms of what is happening in our country. We've had a whole range of things, and we've had movies. So it really varies what communities want us to do in that time, and the ideas that we come through with them. We run conferences that are for Indigenous people by Indigenous people, in terms of all the presentations are Indigenous. Anyone can attend them, but all of the presenters are Indigenous. And workshops is a really big thing. So I've talked a little bit to Susan about this, and we run a lot of community research workshops, a lot. I think that in the last 5 years we've probably trained around 3,000 people, inclusive of community researchers, tribal researchers, students, a whole range of people. And it is really about, if we're thinking, so my view has always been, if we are thinking about being truly kaupapa Māori framed and truly about an Indigenous co-production, then we must be supporting the capacity and capability building of our own communities to take control of their own research. Because really, at the end of the day, we're not that required. For now, we're required for technical expertise, but the ideal is that our communities are actually doing their own driven research in the ways that they wish to do them. So we really commit to a long, ongoing, community-based workshop series that takes the work from the very idea, from having an idea, all the way through to influencing policy and a transformative outcome. So every step of a project. And that's a suite of about 6 workshops that take around 2.5 days each to do. And it's very Indigenous focused, very much about how we do things, and about the assertion of tribal groups to be sovereign in their own lands. So we will come to a time where really it won't be about institutions wanting to do co-production. It'll be whether communities want to do co-production. And that's about putting an emphasis on supporting the capacity building within our own communities. And for us, that is a big issue, building the capability. That is not about having a degree, but it's actually about being able to support having a rangatiratanga, having sovereignty, being self-determined, having your own control of all the things that you wish to do. And one of those things is supporting tribal nations to think about them developing their own research agenda. And thinking carefully about what are the priorities. Because what happens for us at the moment, I'm not sure what happens here, but what happens for us is that we'll have these big funds, big grants, big funders, and someone will have an idea, then they'll go and look for a community to partner with. And if that's a topic that is of value to that community, then that's great. That can work if it's worked through in a self-determining, equitable way. But what we find is that often communities will say, well, actually, we want to look at water. Water is really important, but we're not interested in that question, But have not had the time to shape what their own research priorities are. So I think that for us, the next step for us really is, if we want to be in meaningful co-production, in a kaupapa Māori way or a decolonising way, of research with our communities. First and foremost, they need the support to build their own research agenda and to determine their own research priorities. So that then they can say very clearly, without being caught, because often they're caught on the hop, you know? It's like, oh, we've got a week to put this proposal in. I mean, I've had people grab me in stairwells and say, we need a multi-researcher, can you find us one? And it's due tomorrow. You know, and that's, you know, when we're talking about co-production, we're talking about decolonising methodologies. We actually are also talking about decolonising our own institutions to think differently about how they do these things. And to create models of doing things that push beyond what is the generally accepted norm of research, which is not an Indigenous way of doing things. So I just wanted to share some of those things really around how we do stuff and some of the things that are coming up for us. I think the other thing, and for us as a Māori research institute, you know, we really are, we're looking more to research relationships with other Indigenous nations and working across the oceans that connect us, because it's, our people see the oceans connect us. So Ngā Taio there, where the ocean between my land and this land, or the coast part of this land, connects us, you know. It doesn't separate us. And so we're looking more to how do we forge the Indigenous relationships across the world that will help us to inform our, you know, where we are at, and to inform longer, deeper relationships around how we deal with some issues that are very similar